Argentina has a long history as an oil-producing country since the discovery of petroleum in 1907 and the creation in 1922 of the first state-owned company in the world, Yacimientos Petrolíferos Fiscales, also known as YPF. Today, Argentina has about 0.2% of the world's oil and gas proved reserves. In 2011, Argentina represented the 0.8% of world petroleum's production and 1.3% of gas, being thus the greatest Latin American gas producer. The creation of YPF extraordinarily depicts the Latin American feeling towards the natural resources of the continent. In the same way, it sets the basis for the nationalization and monopolization by Latin American states of their oil resources in the forthcoming decades of the 20th century. Due to the history of Latin American continent, a strong, energetic or resource nationalism has characterized the collective identity of those countries. In a continent whose raw materials are exploited by foreigners since centuries ago, the fact of being able of having your own resources implies much more than an investment of capital. It also depicts the desire of being able to use the natural wealth in your own benefit. At the same time, as many other oil-rich countries, Argentina also experienced a resource curse. It was not a proper resource curse, since it was not a matter of a permanent weak structure of the state that will lead to the empowerment and corruption of the Argentinian elite. On the contrary, that situation was rather produced by military coups backed by foreign economic interests that would overthrow more solid democratic regimes. Argentina experienced a sort of intermittent resource curse according to its political regimes, being the dictatorial regimes the worst periods for the country in relation to oil. On the contrary, democracy was characterized by having a strong commitment to redistribute the rewards of oil and gas. YPF was founded in 1922 by the Argentinian president Hipólito Yrigoyen, who declared that, in order to keep the benefits of petroleum for the people of the Republic, it is mandatory to put the oil fields under the control of the state, conferring to it the monopoly over its exploitation and commercialization. YPF was born from the nationalist popular government and from the military sector that defended economic nationalism. Additionally, the British interest in stopping the expansion in Latin America of the American company Standard Oil also played a major role. As Yrigoyen did before, Enrique Mosconi, the general director of YPF in 1922, focused on the idea of the Latin American independence over its natural resources. In 1936, Mosconi declared in Montevideo, "Yesterday it was Argentina with YPF and Mexico. Today, Uruguay. Tomorrow, Brazil, Chile, Peru, Colombia, and Venezuela will rise similar organizations over which will rest the integral independence of Latin America." During the first 7 years since its creation, YPF multiplied by 400 times its initial capital without any external financing, only with the oil that it produced. However, in 1930, President Yrigoyen was overthrown by a coup led by José Félix Uriburu, who was supposedly backed up by several foreign companies, which, in turn, wanted to stop the galloping nationalization of the Argentinian oil fields. In 1946, after 16 years of dictatorship, a new government chaired by Juan Domingo Perón was elected. In 1949, a new constitution was drafted, which declared the oil fields, coal and gas, and the rest of the energy resources to be the inalienable and imprescriptible property. Yet, in 1976, a new military dictatorship, known as the National Reorganization Process, was established, tearing apart any national interest that had been fostered since 1946. According to Perón himself, "We were victims of a death struggle for oil. The goal was to prevent the Argentine oil resources from being exploited for the industrial development of the country. It is not difficult to understand that, in oil terms, the capitals defined as Europeans are essentially British." In 1983, democracy was again established in Argentina. In 1991, with the convertibility plan, the government of Carlos Menem allowed for the privatization of the Argentinian public companies. This fact implied a break in the national claim on the natural resources that had characterized Argentinian democracies throughout the 20th century. This time again, the driving forces also seemed to come from abroad. It was the era of the Washington Consensus and the implementation of neoliberal policies across Latin America. As democracy consolidated and won over skeptics of liberal economics, markets were given more play across Latin America, and privatization made significant inroads on the Latin American continent. Therefore, the National Congress passed in 1991 the law for the privatization of assets and shares of YPF, and in 1999 the company was sold to the Spanish Repsol. Since 1992, both upstream and downstream activities are totally controlled by the private sector. The privatization of YPF was carried out in order to attract investment and attain the self-sufficiency of oil. The first goal was undoubtedly achieved. Between 1992 and 1999, the Argentinian state earned incomes by the privatization of YPF of $20,000 million, of which $15,000 million corresponded to the acquisition performed by Repsol. During the following 2 decades of the privatization, however, the Argentinian government had to gradually increase its imports of energy, to the point that in 2011 it had to import more oil than it exported, for the first time in 17 years. For example, the production of oil decreased since 1999 with the Spanish control of YPF. It dropped from the 42% of the national production of oil in 1999 to the 24% in 2011. In the same way, Argentina became a net importer of gas in 2011. That is, it imported more gas than it exported. On April 16, 2012, the Congress of Argentina decided to renationalize Yacimientos Petrolíferos Fiscales. This trend of increasing oil and gas shortage was one of the reasons alleged to carry out the expropriation and renationalization by the current president of Argentina, Cristina Fernández de Kirchner. The Argentinian president justified renationalization of YPF on the grounds that it failed to boost the oil and natural gas production needed to keep up with the local demand. Moreover, according to the Argentinian Institute of Oil and Gas, since the privatization of YPF in 1999, the oil and gas reserves have decreased dramatically, especially the gas reserves. Another strong rationale for Argentina to expropriate YPF is related to the discovery in 2011 of the field of Vaca Muerta, which counts for the third largest shale oil and shale gas fields in the world. The discourse of 2012 expropriation of YPF went back to the Latin American resource nationalism, that is, that the natural resources in the ground or undersea are the property of the nation rather than the property of a firm or individual who owns the surface. In this sense, the Argentinian president, Cristina Fernández de Kirchner, whose husband and former president of Argentina, Néstor Kirchner, had helped in the privatization of YPF, stated that the oil companies do not have to forget that the owners of the subsoil are the provinces. The oil companies, thus, are hardly concessionaires. The nationalist euphoria could also be strongly felt in the Argentinian Congress, where the decision to renationalize was approved by 208 votes in favor, 32 against, 11 absences, and 6 abstentions. The Congress declared of public utility the 51% of YPF and YPF gas, both under control of Repsol. After the expropriation, Repsol only owned 6.43% of the company. In general, Latin Americans have a very strong nationalist consciousness. This could be due to the fact that nationalism is sometimes the only hook that keeps heterogeneous societies united. National symbols substitute social consensus. Raw materials, oil and gas especially, are that kind of symbols. Although the nationalization of YPF was aimed at achieving energy sufficiency, the reality is that, according to the Secretary of Energy of the nation, it produced 40% less petroleum and 38% less gas in 2012 than it did in 2003, which means a decrease of 4.3% of the petroleum production and 3.1% of the gas production with respect to 2011. According to the Argentine Institute of Energy, if Argentina does not rectify the direction of its energy management, it is aimed to deepen its failure.